Robert, did we finish we talked a little tiny bit about that Chevron ordinance. Did we give that enough play that you kind of explain that to everybody, that 40-year gig? Is that big thing? Did you want to finish that thread or are we good on that?
Well, I'll just and the issue is not the Chevron ordinance. Chevron deference
Yeah.
is the term, and what that refers to is that the in for now 40 years or so, the courts have shown deference to the administrative state because they have said, "Oh well, you're the bureaucrats, you know best. We'll leave it to you to decide congressional intent." Well, so fast forward to this Loper Bright decision, which was handed down by the court on June 28th. What was the issue there? Well, the Department of Commerce had issued rules that were forcing commercial fishermen to pay for to have observers come onto their boats and to make sure that they were complying with different federal regulations. Well, so the plaintiff, Loper Bright Enterprises, along with is it Relentless Inc. I think is the name of the other plaintiff. My friend Megan Lapp was one of the plaintiffs in the case. She's a fisherwoman out of Rhode Island, and they sued and said, "You, this is overreach by the Department of Commerce. You are forcing us to take on this inordinate amount of cost and inconvenience, and Congress never made this law. You just made this up." So that was the case. That was the pivotal issue there in that case. And the Supreme Court handed down this decision on a 6-3 vote, the conservative justices prevailing, saying, no, you've overstepped here. The administrative state doesn't have this power to do this, to make these mandates. So what does this mean? I guess just very briefly, and I've talked about this in several of my presentations recently, including in just the other day when I spoke to the Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Well, this is a very important decision. It's going to be litigated. We're going to see a flood of litigation that's going to happen in the next few years regarding a lot of the federal regulations that have been handed down from the administrative state. It's not going to end the administrative state. It's not yet clear what it's going to mean for the states, right? Where remember, a lot of these EV mandates at the state level are happening from the administrative state, not from the assemblies or the legislatures, like the California Air Resources Board was the one that mandated EVs in California, not the California Assembly. And then finally, the point that I make as well is that while this is important, it's not going to fix the electric grid. The electric grid that we have now is increasingly fragile. We're seeing more and more blackouts, a lot more warnings about the fragility of the grid. So there are many things coming together here, but the thing that I've been talking about a lot is the fragility of the electric grid, the fact that we need more generation. It's difficult to expand the grid, high voltage transmission, all these things coming together, supply chains, labor force, all around the expansion of the grid, the resilience and affordability of electricity, all are key issues that we're going to have to deal with now for many years to come.
I saw one of your videos. I watch a lot of your videos, and you were talking about electricity and electricity growth, and you
Yeah.
to kind of recap that because you're talking about India and you're talking about China and how much electricity they're using and how they generate this electricity and the projections in the future and how that. Well, I'll just let you tell the story because you say it a heck of a lot better than I do. Go ahead, Robert, please.
Well, sure. I wrote this on my Substack just a couple of days ago, robertbryce.substack.com. And I pointed out that this year globally, electricity use will grow by about 4%. That's according to the International Energy Agency in the report that they released in July. And they're projecting that global demand will increase again by 4% next year. So this is very robust growth. This means that if you apply the law of 72, you divide 4 into 72, we'll double the global electricity demand in less than 20 years. And that's been true historically. So electricity is the world's fastest growing and most important form of energy. It's the form of energy we crave over every other. So why does this matter to us here in the United States? Well, our demand is growing very rapidly as well. It's going to be up by about 3.5% this year, which is a big gain over last year when power demand actually fell by about a point and a half, something like that. But the key is what's going on, not just in the United States, of course, all of that matters, but it's really what's happening in China and India, where in India this year, the IEA expects power demand will grow by 8%. Tom, that means it's doubling. India's power demand will double at the current rate every 9 years. I mean, this is just a staggering rate of growth in a country that has 1.4 billion people. And what are the people in India doing? They're buying air conditioners. And industry is growing and industrial plants are moving to India. trying to hedge their bets against China. Meanwhile, in China, power demand is growing by 6.5%. So, and what are those countries doing? They're burning more coal. So while I delude ourselves with this conceit, and I think that's the right word in the West about, oh, we're going to solve climate change with climate hawks and climate activism and just stop oil and all the rest of it. It's decimal dust in the big picture because of what is happening in India and China. And to be clear, I'm not saying what we do doesn't matter. What I am saying is that it doesn't matter very much, given this staggering growth that we're seeing in the use of coal, the industrialization in India, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, other countries in South Asia. This is where this is the story, and we delude ourselves to think we're going to solve climate change or brag about, oh, we're spending all these hundreds of billions of dollars on the Inflation Reduction Act, and this is the most important law ever passed, ever, to quote the president, on climate action. Well, okay, yeah, you can spend all that money. It doesn't mean it's going to change the temperature.
Robert, I got a question with the electric co-ops. If we would have taken that money, that the whatever $7 billion that they earmarked for charging stations that they didn't build any charging stations for, and if they would have just invested that money into our electric infrastructure as a starting point, because I know, being a former low voltage guy myself, I know that that's not going to be even close to getting, but at least it's a start. That's where they should be putting this money. They should be putting this money not into charging stations. They should be putting money into the distribution framework for these electric co-ops and helping them with having a little more robust delivery systems. Am I on target with that?
Well, let me back up just for a minute and just fill out the why I'm so in favor of cooperatives and public power. First, let's dial back almost 100 years, 90 years, and look at where America was in the 1920s, 1930s. The big electric utilities were monopolies then. You only had the monopolies. You didn't have co-ops. You didn't have public power. And so rural areas, small towns, they generally didn't have good electric service, or many of them didn't have it at all. And this is not ancient history, Tom, to think about the era of pre-electrification in America. My dear friend Chris Cawthon and I've been friends for 50 years. His dad, Ron, remembers in the late 1940s growing up on a farm in Veneta where they didn't have power. He remembers the day they got electricity in their farmhouse outside of Veneta, Oklahoma. So this is within living memory. And what happened in Veneta, Oklahoma, and in other rural areas across the country, they got electrification because of the passage of the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935 and the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. And those were two measures that really FDR campaigned on them in 1932 to break the big trusts. And he attacked Samuel Insull, I think unfairly in many ways, but nevertheless, the result is that today we have now 2,000 publicly owned power entities. Like you're in Lansing, you have a city-owned utility there. It's not a cooperative, it's city-owned. The city owns it. Like I live in Austin, we have Austin Energy. The city owns the electric utility. They also own the water utility. They also own the airport, right? That's not the case in every city, but Texas also has tons of co-ops. So does Kansas. I spoke in Kansas a few days ago to the Kansas Electric Cooperative. Almost all of Kansas is covered by cooperatives. So they are part of the fabric of rural America. And that's one of the reasons why I love them the way I do. And it's that, again, I'm just incredibly privileged and lucky in my career. I get to go around and meet these people that are on the boards of these cooperatives, and they're the small merchants, they're the ranchers, they're the farmers, the sad sack farmers who always pour mouth and everything, but they're also the most optimistic people. And so it's incredible to me to be able to get to know these people whose job it is, they're elected to the board, and their job is as board members, is to look after the public trust. And so that's one of the reasons why I just think this is such a critically important part of America, this diffusion of economic and political power that is embodied by the cooperatives, as well as public power, I would argue as well. But the co-ops, I think, are, again, they're this living remnant of the New Deal, and that public ownership, to me, of these critical assets is just truly important, and one that I think has been one of the many reasons why the United States flourished in the way that it did in the wake of World War II.
Give us a guesstimation, just so people understand. What do you think it would cost, and how long would it take to get our grid up to snuff? What would it cost, and how long would it take?
Well, I'll answer the last question first, and as I don't know. And, it depends on what you consider up to snuff and, how many nines of reliability you expect. And I'll make one quick point here. I bought a Generac. I have a 22 kilowatt standby generator that I'm installing in my house. I'm waiting for the natural gas hookup, and then I'm going to have standby power at my house. Why? Because the lights keep going out 3 times in the last year. We've had blackouts of 8 hours or more. And I live in central Austin. So this is what I do. This is what I study. I have solar panels on the roof of my house. I have a Generac. I might get a battery system. I'm, looking out for number one here, because I see what is happening with the reliability of the electric grid. Regarding the spending on EV charging, I mean, we could do another hour on this, Tom. Electric vehicles are the next big thing, and they always will be. I mean, we've heard the hype around EVs for over a century, and what are we now? Here we are today, and they're still less than double digit sales, and the sales are cooling off. Why? Because people look at the EV and they do the comparison on a value proposition. They're saying, thank you. I'll buy the V6. I'll buy the V8, the hybrid, whatever, because they're a better value for the consumer than the fully electric vehicle. So I've been a long time skeptic. I'm still skeptic. EVs, the next big thing. They always will be. We've heard this hype for over a century. And yet where are we today? It's still a niche market product, not a mass market one. So the part that chaps my hide is that the government and ordinary taxpayers are having to subsidize the build out of all these charging stations for EV owners. And who owns EVs? Rich folks. The working class people don't drive EVs. Come on, it's a joke. They can't afford them. So we just and we could talk about China and supply chains and EVs if you want, but this administration is just hell bent on this electric vehicle foolishness, and it's going to be very costly. And I wrote on my Substack a few weeks ago, Ford lost $47,000 for every EV they sold. You're a Michigan guy. They lost $47,000 for every EV they sold in the second quarter. They're going to lose $5 billion this year on their EV madness. Ford Motor Company, a good Michigan company, a Dearborn based, bedrock American company that is a legendary company in America. And they're just pissing this money away.
Robert Bryce is my guest, the flamethrower. Robert, before we get back into the offshore wind scam and motor fuel, let's get all your contact info. How would you like people to contact you, your books, all of your speaking? Go ahead, please.
Oh gosh, I'm easy to find on the Google, Tom. I'm on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. You can see my website, robertbryce.com. I'm on TikTok. Oh yeah, I'm on TikTok. I'm on TikTok.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
on I'm on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm on Instagram. I'm hard to miss on the Google. But by all means, of course, check out our new docuseries, juicetheseries.com is the website, juicetheseries.com. The 5-part episode on electricity in America. Each episode's about 20 minutes. I'm really proud of it. It came out really well. Kudos to my colleague Tyson Culver. It's called Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. And so where everybody's talking about the grid these days, well, it's what our docuseries looks at and ends up being very pro-nuclear because I'm pro-nuclear.
That's Robert Bryce, calling him the flamethrower, the title of today's episode. What's your takeaway for today, Robert? We got a couple minutes before we got to go to break this bad boy down. What's your takeaway? Go right ahead, please.
Well, robertbryce.substack.com. How about that as a takeaway? I'd also ask people, if you care about these issues, energy can be complicated, but it's not that complicated. I mean, look, if I can figure it out, anybody can, right? This isn't rocket surgery here. But it takes some work to understand the difference between energy and power. They're not the same things. Energy is the ability to do work. Power is the rate at which work gets done. We convert energy into power, into useful power. So understanding these things, it's basic math, basic physics. It's not that hard to understand. But if I were to say, what is the one takeaway? It's that we need energy and we need it cheap, abundant, and reliable in that order. And that's being lost. It's being obscured in a lot of this headlong rush toward, making climate the only issue. Climate change is a concern. It's not our only concern.
Robert Bryce called me homie. Makes me want to cry. He is so awesome. The guy is just so hilarious on this super serious topic. And let me step back here. Flamethrower, the reason I called it flamethrower, and we never even got into it because you can't have an electric flamethrower. You can have a propane flamethrower, and it's got to have some kind of something that burns. And so understand that if you become more educated about all this stuff, follow the money, everybody. Just follow the freaking money. That's all there is to it. And from there, I will leave it and say thank you to Robert Bryce and thank you to all of the listeners and the followers of the radio program and the podcast and everything that we do. Thank you so much. We're approaching 1 million views on YouTube, which is a little surreal to me. But you know what? You just got to stay at it. Just if you've got something you want to do in your refinement zone, use me as an example. Just get busy. Just get busy. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, doing all those cool things. Tell everybody about our show, and we will talk to you next time. Until then, I'm Papa Tom. Have a great day, everybody. Peace out. Love y'all.